Hello, listeners, and welcome to Season 3 of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host, Casey, and I wanted to update this introduction to offer a few additional trigger warnings about upcoming content. As you likely know, this is a podcast about cults, extremism, coercive control, and abuses of all types. A platform for survivors and victims to share their experiences, change misconceptions, and help advocate for and educate others. Given the recent election results in America and the nature of upcoming interview themes, I wanted to remind listeners that each episode comes with a content warning for themes of murder, abuse and harm, and abortion rights and restrictions. Please take care when listening to each installment. Self-care practices may include being outside for walks or gardening or leaning into friends and family and loved ones, or participating in an activity that brings you joy, like a trip to the cinema, or exercise, or taking a nap. Whatever self-care looks like to you, be sure to practice these things when listening to this material and any other material like this. For early access to ad-free episodes, you can find me on patreon.com/thecultvault for as little as £1 a month. Thank you so much for my patrons for being such a beacon of support, and I look forward to our monthly video call catch-ups at the end of each month. Lastly, I'm so very excited for my favourite weekend of the year in June 2025, CrimeCon UK in London on the 7th and 8th of June. Partnered with True Crime, this is going to be the biggest and busiest and best CrimeCon UK to date, with expert speakers, survivors and advocates of justice taking to the stage to discuss their work in the field of true crime. It's the UK's biggest true crime event, and it's jam-packed with talks and events throughout the weekend, with the most flexible ticket options available, including day tickets, night tickets, weekend tickets, concessions, and different options for payment plans available now at crimecon.co.uk. I will be at the event. I'm so glad that I've been invited back again, and hopefully you will see me up on the big stage, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Head to crimecon.co.uk and use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, at the checkout for 10% off your tickets. And patrons, you can contact me for an additional reduction in ticket prices. Now, on to today's show. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. Today, I am joined by a returning guest and friend of the show who's recently updated the cover of his publication, and it now has my name on it with a little bit of my thoughts and feedback on what I thought of Peter's book, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, which is available for purchase today. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure, Casey. First of all, thanks for having me back on. It's been about, I think, a year and a half. But it's great to see you again. Great to talk to you again. I live in just outside of Bozeman, Montana, and I am the author of Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger.
I always fumble over the title of the book, but I realized that it also includes a little subheading now, which says My Journey in and Out of a Cult. Do you think that that has helped people to recognize that this is a memoir about a cultic experience?
Well, that's why I put it in there, so I certainly hope so. You know, the first cover of the book, which I really loved, it was very aesthetically pleasing, had a picture of a tiger, and so some people, they didn't know what it was about, nor did Amazon know what the book was about, so it wasn't getting to the right customers. So I changed the cover photograph, and I added that little subtitle, try and make it clear. Because again, you know, when you write something like this, like a memoir that is this personal, where you're really peeling back the onion to show everybody what happened, well, you want it to get out there to the right audience. You want people to read it. Because, Casey, I'll tell you, there's been a lot of people that have, maybe not been in a cult, but experienced something pretty bad. And then they'll read my book, and they'll reach out to me, and they'll contact me, and they'll say, thank you for writing this. And then it, triggered some kind of a memory or as an encouragement to them. And, as being a writer, that when you hear that really makes your day.
It's awesome to hear that the changes have been making a positive impact in terms of getting your book out there in front of more readers. I do think that it is a very poignant memoir in the cult space in terms of highlighting how you can not be recruited into a cult and not be born and raised into a cult, but still be kind of pulled into a cultic environment by accident. And I think that that's not really a space that's spoken about too much, because what I understand from reading the book and speaking to you last time is that you almost married into this cult.
That's really the best way to put it, or I say I unwittingly married into it. When I married, the love of my life, now what would it be, 27 years ago. And at the time, I didn't know it was a cult. I knew it was weird. I knew the little cult leader, Uncle Robert, or Robert Booty, was an odd guy. And that was really the one pause I had before going into the marriage. I thought, well, okay, he's weird and odd, but he lives far away from where we were going to live, so this would be fine. In hindsight, right? Hindsight can be 20/20. It's not always guaranteed to be 20/20, but in this case, I feel like I'm pretty close. It would have been very hard at my age to really have that much awareness to say, "Oh, I'm about to marry into a disastrous situation." I don't think I really had the wherewithal or maturity back then to see that, and I don't know how many people would have.
I don't know how other people feel, how you feel, or how listeners feel about my perspective on things, but most families have one or two family members that they talk about that are problematic, or that are always causing some kind of issue or drama at family parties, or we don't know if we can invite Uncle so-and-so to the wedding because we're not sure if he'll drink too much or start an argument or get into a fight. I know my family, my partner's family, most of my friends' families all have one or two of those family members. So it's not like you hear these things about somebody that your family, that the family you're marrying into, that they have this one character that raises a few red flags, but you don't think at the time that that's going to infect the entire family network.
Yeah, and too, for your listeners, that this Uncle Robert is what we called him, was not related to anybody. So he was merely a very close family friend of my future in-laws, who, then kind of cultivated this very abusive, parasitic relationship. So he was never just, like, I get what you're saying, oh, Uncle so-and-so is coming, oh my gosh, hide the bourbon or whatever. And you got to be careful. That was never the case. It was almost as if, how would I put it? Oh, Uncle Robert said it's okay for us to have this celebration. Uncle Robert said we should be here for this get-together. Like, it was about him from beginning to end. And again, I saw tidbits of it. I saw hints of it before I got married and in the first few years of my marriage, but I had no idea what was coming.
The new cover for your book is really powerful. I like the tiger as well, but the way that you are clearly the tall man on the front page and your face is uncovered and you're standing next to little cult leader, Robert, and he's here and he's short, a lot shorter than you are, and his face is covered out by the word tiger. It's really powerful, and I think if you read the book, you understand where that comes from. But in case people haven't picked up the book and they haven't listened to our first conversation, could you talk the listeners through where the title of the book came from?
Sure. And it's hard literally not to get goosebumps every time I talk about it this many years later, after having talked about it this many times. But when I first met Paige, my future wife, she had just previously had a dream. It was a very important dream to her. She felt that it was, a very strong message from the Lord. And so the dream talked about, a tiger, the tiger was after her. And Uncle Robert, she immediately shared the dream with Uncle Robert. He wrote this crazy long letter, sent it to her. She got the letter like maybe a day or two after we met. And, it talked about this tall man, talked about the tiger. And I do believe, looking back, listen, I'm not a prophet or anything like that, but I do believe that it was a clear warning that the Lord gave her. And Uncle Robert was able to twist it 180 degrees and use the message and his interpretation of it to basically cement his control over her. So I'll let you read the book and really discover what it's all about, because it's a fascinating story. But it's also tragic, because here's this young, impressionable young lady. Paige would have been about 24 at the time, and she was no match for the very charismatic, narcissistic, and psychologically astute, let's say, someone who knows a lot about psychology, Uncle Robert, that was able to manipulate her. And the outcome was not what I believe it should have been for her.
And the preface to the introduction of Uncle Robert in the book is probably one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever read. I really enjoyed those first few chapters of you meeting Paige and you two falling in love with each other. It's really quite moving. I suppose even more so when you get to the end of the book and you do realize how things play out at the end of the writing. And maybe, who knows, there'll be a second book at some point. But before we get into where things stand at the moment, could you share with us your understanding of what cults were before you met your wife and her family? And how did your initial impressions change after becoming involved with the family and the extended fake faux family of Uncle Robert?
Yeah, great question, Casey. I would say I was probably like a lot of people here in the U.S., where when I thought about cults, it was something other people experience in other towns or other states. Certainly not, people like me who were smart and educated, supposedly. They could see these things a mile away. And so I would think of Jonestown. I would think of the Branch Davidians, David Koresh, Heaven's Gate, et cetera, or I would think of it as something so obvious that you would see it coming, and that's something that I would never allow to happen. So when I was in the throes of it, it was never in my mind, wow, my wife and my in-laws are in a cult, and I'm on the verge of this. What do I do? It was never that kind of a mental calculation. It was always, boy, this guy's weird. He's really weird. And why do my in-laws and my wife believe him? It wasn't until my life was completely turned upside down. I was put through the ringer. I had hit rock bottom in my life. I'd really gone through a hard time. And all my friends and family, distant family on the outside, were able to see it and help me see it. And then I read a number of books. One of them was Stephen Hassan's Combating Cult Mind Control, that I started to finally realize, wow, I was in a cult. So it took a very long time for me to finally realize that. I tell people, I was brainwashed for probably up to 2.5 years, and it took me a year to recover.
Very slow burning as well, which is described throughout your book in terms of the very slow indoctrination into Robert's belief system, and into kind of revering Uncle Robert as some kind of prophet or kind of close to godliness, which is how I, through your writing, how I perceived him wanting everybody to think about him and feel about him. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely so. In a number of books that I've read on cults, they talk about the role of the cult leader trying to become a gatekeeper to God, or a gatekeeper to whatever faith or religion you believe in. We as Christians, we're groomed to view Uncle Robert as, more enlightened, more faithful, more Christian than any of us, so that he was the gatekeeper. So in the Christian faith, it talks about Jesus Christ being the shepherd and the gate. He's the only way into eternal life, into heaven. And Uncle Robert set himself up as like an extra gate. You had to go through him first. You had to get his approval first. You had to make sure that he knew you knew what you were doing before you were ready to be saved, which were all kind of nonsensical, unbiblical ideas. And really, when you boil right down to it, they're wicked, they're evil, because he's just a guy just like you and I. There's nothing really special about him, nor any of these other cult leaders. And yet that is the image that they try so hard to make sure that they maintain 24/7.
It's interesting to hear you use the words, there's nothing really special about him. He's just the same as you and me. Well, I mean, I would call him a con artist, but that's just my way of describing these people that are able to infiltrate themselves into other people's lives and create total chaos, as well as total control. It's something that seems beyond comprehension until you start to look at how methods of coercive and controlling behavior work. And when all of those tactics are combined, they result in things like your wife's family's undue influence from Robert himself. But how is it that the family became involved with him to begin with? If they're not related, is it like something that goes back through generations, or is it just one of your wife's family members was in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Well, probably the latter. So it's actually another interesting story. Robert was born and raised in Syria. They came to America, married actually a very normal, seemingly normal person to me. She was from Tennessee, I believe. And then he went to a small seminary in Southern California. I think it was in Fresno, back like in the late 60s, early 70s. And Paige's father was going to that same seminary. I think he was, newly married. Paige, I don't think was even born yet. So they're going to this tiny little seminary, and they somehow meet, and the relationship started there. And it was odd from the beginning. Robert was graduated from the seminary, but Paige's father was not. He was denied graduation because he had a lot of issues in his life as well. So he was kind of ripe for a guy like Robert, and they would have been probably mid to late 20s at this time, and Robert would have been only maybe a year or two older than him. And that's when it all started. So before Paige was even born. And so she was born into this little cult where the expert on literally everything was Uncle Robert.
You mentioned previously that you didn't think Uncle Robert was going to be too much of a bother in your marriage, and his involvement with your family as a married family, and as your in-laws an extension of that, because he was living far away. So how is it that things gradually escalated to the point where he really was having that undue influence over you in the same way that he was Paige's father all those years ago?
Well, the advent of cell phones certainly helped him out quite a bit, because he lived in Southern California. Paige and I, during most of these years, were in Idaho or Montana. Her parents, my in-laws at the time, were in northern Idaho. And so there were a lot of phone calls. And then we would have these conferences. So the conferences were where we would all get together, and Robert would show up, and he would just talk for hours and hours and hours for like a weekend or 3 or 4 days. And we would just sit there and listen to these, some good ideas, a lot of them crazy. And, all the years that we were married, he never moved. He was still in Southern California. We were up here a long way away. But the conferences started to take on a more serious tone. The phone calls started to take on a more serious tone. And when I say that, it was really Paige, because I could see how important his ideas were to her. And over the years, she made it pretty clear to me that they should be more important to me. And I could tell it was somewhat unspoken, but it was very obvious that his ideas are paramount, his ideas are correct, and any ideas that I have, or thoughts or beliefs or opinions that don't fall in line with his, are wrong and need to be eradicated, from our lives. And the marriage hinged on it. Again, Casey, she would have never come out and said any of this, but it was fairly obvious, even for a guy as clueless as I was, fairly obvious to see all this happening.
And in the event of Paige sharing everything with Uncle Robert, the knock-on effect is then he really gets to tell her how you should or shouldn't be behaving and what you should or shouldn't be doing. So there's no privacy in your relationship or ability to have those private conversations as a married couple.
Yeah, none at all. He knew everything, and oftentimes he would know it before I did. So know everything as in what Paige was thinking, what was bothering her, what made her happy, fearful, et cetera, et cetera. And so, he would advise her on, pick a topic, and he would advise her on it. And it made me very uncomfortable. Like you said, there was really no privacy. Now, I had never been married before, so you go into marriage, you don't really know what to expect. I didn't, but I assumed that she and I would be one, and that we would share things that I wouldn't share with anybody else. And I kind of expected her to do the same. And I think early on in our marriage, early on in our marriage, there's a lot of sharing going on that I was not aware of. I'll give you another example. After she left, so this is, maybe 20 years after the fact, we talk about in my book, a fairly traumatic birth to our second child. She was in bed rest, and he went into the NICU, the intensive care unit, because he was born early, et cetera, et cetera. So when I talk about in the book how she felt this was judgment from the Lord for not defending Uncle Robert, that the Lord was going to literally kill this child in the womb, which thankfully did not happen. But she wrote this long, heartfelt, gut-wrenching, anguished letter, kind of almost like in a diary style, about her actions that led to the near death of this child. And I saw this on my computer about 20 years later. I'd never seen this letter. I had no idea that she'd written it or that she'd felt this way. And in the letter, it was clear that she and Uncle Robert had had numerous discussions about this, and I had no clue. So that would have been maybe 3 years into our marriage. So I did not know at the time. I knew Uncle Robert. I knew that he was important. I knew that he was, kind of out there and weird. I had no clue in those early years of our marriage just how, let's say, pernicious and oppressive, but that's not the right word, how she had really looked to him for guidance on everything.
You said that the marriage hinged on your ability to essentially get on board with Uncle Robert's ideas, thoughts and beliefs. There's a part in the book that really stuck out to me. It was a really hard bit to get through because it was almost like being in the room and watching something extremely uncomfortable. I think it's almost like how you would imagine feeling if you went to deliverance ministry or a place where they performed kind of like exorcisms on people. Right. And that's the part where you have this, I guess it's a conference with Uncle Robert, and he kind of keeps you in the room with him until you finally kind of just break and submit to him. And it's I'm not sure how it is for you to talk about it, but it's certainly an uncomfortable part of the book to read.
Yeah, so I call that the Butte ambush. It is kind of apropos that it takes place in Butte. Butte is a very interesting town in Montana. It's an old mining community. So it's got its rough edges. And we went to this absolutely dumpy little hotel. And the whole reason that we were all there, so to me, Paige, my in-laws, Uncle Robert, and his little sidekick, Michael. And the only reason we're there is me, to to pulverize me, to beat me up, to convince me that I am a worthless, demonic human being that is still not saved. And I don't see it. And I think I am saved. I think I am a Christian. Of course, everyone else in the room knows that Peter is trying to pull the wool over our eyes. He's not been truly saved. And only Uncle Robert has the ability at this point to actually save it. So it's a very dark scene. You're right. I mean, I could look back on it now, and I don't have any problem talking about it or writing about it. But it is really weird. It's really dark. And I say in my book that everybody in that room was sick, including me, and they were sick in their mind to think that that was appropriate, that that was a legitimate gathering of Christian believers, and this is how you would go about things. It was not. It was awful. Here you have this little narcissistic guy that has complete control over everybody in the room except for maybe me, and now he wants to assert it, and he does by convincing me that I am a worthless human being, and now I'm ready to be saved. It was awful. I mean, I could tell, Casey, that, for you to read that, it was probably disturbing. It was all that and more to be there in that moment.
Narcissistic is the perfect word. It's almost like the way that somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, if they can't ascertain their control over somebody, will continue to go to further and further lengths to achieve that. And it makes me wonder if this gathering hadn't been successful in the way he wanted it to be, where he could just basically feel accomplished in his need for control over everyone and everything, what would have come next? Maybe he was not convinced that he did always have, or that he managed to have full control over you, because things still continue to be difficult with Uncle Robert after this engagement. I fear for your physical safety in this part of the book. I fear for it further down the line, because I wonder, how far this man's going to go with what he does. But then, of course, at this point, there are children involved. And I'm not sure if there's a way you could talk to us about how having children in the picture and your wife so involved with Uncle Robert at this point, how that changes the dynamics at all.
Sure. Let me actually try and give you an answer to your first question, or what you were talking about in terms of that meeting with Robert. If I did not comply, if Robert did not get the outcome that he was looking for, well, he basically alluded to it in the meeting, which was he knew his leverage over me was my marriage. And so he knew that Paige believed everything he said, so did my in-laws, but I was the one who questioned. So thus the meeting, thus the need for him to crush me so that I am fully submissive to him. And he basically went about it by saying, do you want to leave right now? As in, do you want to leave the marriage? As in, I can't remember the exact words he used, but, here's Paige. She agrees with me. Here's your in-laws. They agree with me. And they're submissive to me. Again, he didn't use these words, and you're not. Do you want to leave? And he literally pointed to the door. And the audacity in that moment, when you think about it, first of all, what an awful thing to say, but the audacity to then think in your mind that you're so arrogant that you have the authority to break up this marriage. I don't know if Paige had ever said that. Well, gee, Uncle Robert, if he doesn't agree now, I'm going to leave him. I don't think so. But here's this man basically saying, well, go ahead and get out if you're not going to listen to me. Who the hell are you to say you have the right to break up this marriage? So that is the answer to your question. If I had not been submissive enough, I would have been shown the door. Now, Paige ended up leaving about 5 or 6 months after that anyway. But you're right. We did have, at that moment, 5 children. Thankfully, none of them were in the room during that meeting, but they saw similar moments later on. And what the kids saw, which is fascinating now that I think back on it, what the kids saw were moments where I was getting, pummeled emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, just being humiliated and embarrassed, crushed. But what they saw was their mother doing it to their father. They didn't really see it from Uncle Robert. Those meetings were always with him, me, my wife, and my in-laws. The kids really never saw that, which is fascinating now that I think about it. But they saw several times where their mother basically, kind of almost took over the rule of Robert Booty and would chastise me and try and crush me like I was the sixth child, like I was a little boy. And I think, and I know that must have been so hard and confusing, especially for the little children, to see, why is mommy talking about daddy this way? And again, I'm not trying to paint myself in some wonderful light, but I didn't do drugs. I wasn't a drunk. I had a job. I had a career. I loved my kids. I was faithful. So it must have been very confusing for the kids to see that, and probably terrifying as well. Because for the kids, I know they saw the way I was treated, and I'm sure in the back of their mind, they thought, man, I don't want to get that treatment. No matter what I got to do, I got to make sure I'm not on the receiving end of that kind of anger from my mom.
That is wild to hear you talk about things that way, because I don't think it was ever written like that in the book either. I don't think you were very fair, to say the least, I would say, to with your portrayal of Paige in the book and how you recollected things unfolding. But that's like a sign of somebody in a coercively controlling relationship, kind of unable to realize that the treatment that they are receiving is not right, appropriate, loving. So I don't know if it was like maybe because it's clear in the book how much love you have for your wife and how much you want your marriage to continue, that maybe, I don't know, maybe you didn't see that part of Robert in her. I don't know if you remember it that way at all.
No, I did not understand it in that moment. So I'm thinking in particular of one time where she'd already left me and she came back to have the three youngest kids just kind of spend a weekend with me. She'd only been gone like 2 months, let's say. And, it didn't go well. And she was very angry because I had told the children that I still loved their mother. Of course, she thought that was a lie. I always thought I loved her. And then she could not have the kids having this internal calculation, which would be, well, if daddy loves mommy, why did mommy leave? Of course, Paige couldn't stand that because it all had to be my fault. So that's why she got so mad at me. And so she just blistered me with this egregiously awful moment in front of the 5 kids where she just is incredibly rude and disrespectful and mean towards me. And I'm sitting here bawling and thinking that it's all my fault, that she's right. So then in my little diary or journal that I would just take notes, I wrote something along the lines of, I really felt loved and I was proud of the way she handled it. And you look at that and you say, what in the world was I thinking? Well, I wasn't in my right mind. So of course I did not see how awful she was acting and behaving. I thought, oh, I deserved it. And, she's smarter, more brilliant, more mature than me because she's had more years to listen to Uncle Robert. When in fact, she was just really more brainwashed than I was. And her behavior was off the charts inappropriate. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's difficult to know without kind of being present in the situation whether, because sometimes people will take the teachings of a cult leader and replicate those behaviors and those tactics in a way that feels empowering and comfortable to them because they also happen to have something inside of them that it makes them what I would call a bad person. But then other times, people's responses in situations are an outcome of CPTSD, extreme pressure, anxiety, and depression, chronic confusion, the inability to make any decisions or to take care of yourself without the person you are like wholly dependent on telling you how to do those things A, B, C, D, E in perfect order. So it's hard to know whether Paige's reactions to you were the first or the second. The way that you describe it in the book, I would say it's the second. It sounds like psychological issues that come from experiencing such high levels of coercion, and the confusion that must come from your parents, kind of putting you into this situation from birth as well. I can't begin to imagine how that unravels the mind at some point.
Yeah. And Casey, she knows nothing different, right? She knows no other world because this is the only life that she's lived. However, I can say, for that brief period, whether it was months, weeks, years, I'm not sure. I think it was years if I look back in the first few years of our marriage, where even though Robert still had his control over her, there was a distance. She ended up getting baptized without him there. We start dating, and it's almost like she's just about to break free from all of this, and she just can't get away from it, and he does not let her break free and have a normal, healthy life. So then fast forward nearly 20 years later, when she's acting the way she is, well, her actions and behaviors mirror that of Robert, which would be someone who is very judgmental, someone who is very critical, self-righteous, and very angry. So here she is, always looking to this man as her authority on everything, and he has a very domineering, self-righteous delivery and way of living his life. And she's been under his thumb all these years. And so that's how she learns how to behave towards me. And so then it really started to show those, that last year or two that we were together, where her behavior, her way, her mode of communication was very similar to his. It was awful.
It reminds me of when you hear people make statements. An example would be just the other day I was speaking to somebody that grew up attracted to the same sex in Orthodox Judaism, and they were told throughout their whole life that they shouldn't exist, basically. And then would meet people outside of once they'd left Orthodox Judaism, they would meet people that were still currently within the church, and then they would read this person's book about growing up gay in Orthodox Judaism and be like, wow, I just always thought gay people were really bad people. And it's kind of like you just espouse what you learn, you repeat what you're told without really thinking about what the words mean and where those things come from, and you don't examine the beliefs. You just kind of say, oh, well, I've heard somebody at the synagogue say that, so I'm going to then say that because that must be how I think and feel. I mean, it's a long-winded example, but it's almost like the language that's being used, it's just somebody else's language. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So here's what comes to my mind. The cult leader will, the goal is to have the followers adopt that person's worldview, which of course, the worldview is, I'm on top, you are below me, and you must come to me for everything. And so, yes, there is, kind of a coded language. And I remember when we were engaged, and I hadn't even met Uncle Robert yet, but I had a talk with Paige. We were telling her how weird it kind of seemed to me, and she said something along the lines of, well, how can you say this? Because, you've never met him. And I told her, I said, well, honey, I'm not saying anything about him. What's weird is how you talk about him, how you, your sister, and your parents talk about this man. He's really weird. okay, now 20 years later, and she's left me, and I'm brainwashed, and I'm trying to explain to people, here's what's happened. Please support me. Please help me. I'm really struggling. But please don't say anything bad about Paige and Uncle Robert. And it was so funny because I was now talking the same way. And people that were trying to help me see the truth that, no, Peter, it's not your fault that your wife left you. And this Uncle Robert guy is crazy. I was using that same language. It took about 20 years, and I didn't know it. I had no idea. I'm like, why are people having a hard time understanding me? Why do they keep thinking it's Uncle Robert's fault and not mine? And, then again, about a year later, I could look back and say, wow, I had adopted the exact same language, the exact same worldview, and my thoughts had ceased to be my own thoughts.
That's the fascinating psychology part of all of this stuff that we learn when we pick up these books and read all of these things that the experts out there have so wonderfully put together for us. I can't begin to imagine how strange those revelations are when you have them and you kind of realize that things have come full circle with you as the person now in Paige's position 20 odd years ago.
Yeah, well, I could see it now, but it was a genuine confusion on my part. And I was still so beaten down. I was still brainwashed, still struggling. Yeah, I'm losing my marriage. I'm losing my family. I'm struggling with my faith. I don't know what to believe. And then I started to have these little nuggets of truth, these little light bulb moments. And it was no one, it was several of them. But as, let's say, the light did come on, it's hard to describe that moment, the realization, the aha of oh my goodness, like those people were right. I really was brainwashed. I'm struggling to put it into words how incredibly odd and yet helpful those moments are. Where you think, no one wants to be told they're wrong, right? No one wants to be, told, hey, you were kind of a fool there. You were really wrong. You should have heard the things you said. But still, we need to go through that. We need to realize that we were wrong so we could overcome it. But having those moments, yes, they were wonderful to where I realized what had happened to me, that I was brainwashed, etc. But again, it's the words are escaping me just how surreal those moments are.
Mm-hmm. I suppose it's validating to have it explained in a way where it really does happen to so many people. It can happen to absolutely anybody. We are all vulnerable to certain types of manipulation and exploitation. And having those resources out there to put the language to the things that you've experienced, at least you know that you're not losing your mind, and at least you know that the treatment that you received and the way that you were harmed is not right, even though you were told for so many years, this is the right thing, this is the way that things should be done. And of course, you're still a man of faith. You have been able to kind of work through all of this stuff and maintain your faith. And I think that's a really important part of our conversation, because a lot of the time I speak to people who kind of divorce from their faith altogether. So I wondered if you could just talk us through how you were able to do that.
Well, I've had people say that to me, Casey. They'll say, wow, it's wonderful that you've gone through this and you haven't turned your back on God or haven't turned your back on your faith. And my answer every time is, well, without it, I wouldn't be here. I grew up in a Christian home, grew up with Bible-believing parents and brothers, family went to church, et cetera, et cetera. And I came to a knowledge of Christianity probably as a teenager. And then going through this, the question in my mind was, wow, have I really not seen it all these years? I'm a man in my late 40s, when it really gets intense and I'm being told that I'm not Christian, I'm not saved, and I've not understood my faith my entire life. Wow, really? Is that the case? And so I'm on the cusp of believing that, and I probably did believe it for, again, about a year or two. So then to come out of it and realize no, he was wrong. And I did not have, the wrong view of my faith. I was not wrong all of these years. And that the Lord then used this tragedy, this very difficult circumstance, to help other people, to help me grow. I'm a much stronger man now, not because I'm stronger, but because of a couple of things. Number one, I don't have a wife or a family guru or an uncle that I look to for approval of every single thought or deed, right? That's unhealthy. I don't care who it is. So I don't have that anymore. And now I can just look to the Lord. It talks about in James, book of the New Testament, and I'm paraphrasing, that if you lack wisdom, ask the Lord, he'll give it to you. But you have to believe, don't doubt. And so I do. And he gives me wisdom, and he gives me faith, and he gives me, energy to get through the day, et cetera, et cetera. He gives me the awareness to be able to write this book and talk about what I went through, so that I can hopefully use what happened to me to help other people. So kind of a long-winded answer to say that my faith is stronger than it's ever been because of what I went through.
Your faith is yours as well. It's a very personal thing, a very private thing. And I feel as though the subject of spiritual abuse and leveraging somebody's spiritual beliefs and their religion, abusing that to control somebody is such a violation of a person's autonomy. Of course, there's a lot that we talk about in terms of physical abuse and stripping away a person's autonomy by controlling them physically. But what comes with coercive control, the psychological and spiritual abuse, it's such a violation of who you are inside and what makes you the person that you are. It's not something that should ever be overlooked or spoken about lightly. And I think it's really powerful to hear you talk about how you are a man of faith, despite all of this stuff, and despite Uncle Robert's attempts to get you to change the way that you do practice your faith. And I'm sure that irks him every day. Gosh.
I would like to, if I could, and I don't know if we talked about this in our previous podcast, but obviously in our discussions and in the world that you have studied and the world that, I kind of came out of, coercive control is a very important idea or point to make, right? And I think everybody would understand what the idea of coercive control. But what I want to say, though, is that coercive control has the ability to do what it's meant to do through vulnerability. Now, we all have a bit of vulnerability. So when I would think of somebody joining a cult, I would think of them being vulnerable because, maybe there's been a death in the family, there's been a divorce, they're financially broke, who knows what it is. They're really seeking or searching, and so they become vulnerable for that narcissistic cult leader to then exert that coercive control. So in my life, my vulnerability, and Robert knew this, was my marriage and my faith. So if he can attack both of those and make both of those contingent on obeying him, well, there's my weak point. There's my vulnerability. And so that's how it happened with me. I was vulnerable because I loved my wife and I wanted to keep my marriage. I was vulnerable because I had a faith that I really believed in. And so that he knew that. And so he said, okay, I'm going to put both of those on thin ice. I'm going to put both of those in the mix. And Peter, you'll lose both of them unless you obey me. And really, in a nutshell, that's how he got his control over me.
When things started to break down between yourself and Paige, and you had 5 children, there were some difficult periods, kind of post-separation on kind of where the children who they would stay with. So I wondered if you could just talk the listeners through how all that played out, because things have changed with that dynamic since we last spoke. Every time you email me, there's an update with a little interesting tidbit. So I was just wondering if you could let us know like how things unfolded after you separated and then how they've changed recently.
Sure. You talk about writing another book. I do not want to write another memoir, but my youngest child,
content there.
yeah, there's a lot of content. Oh my goodness. There was something that had happened traumatically about a year ago, and my youngest daughter, she said, Dad, it's too bad you already published your book because this should go in it. And there's been a few of those moments where, there's something that this should have been in the book. So, the courts got involved. In our case, I don't think it was just your typical divorce because of obviously the cult influence. We did have 5 children. So mostly the kind of the back and forth of the tug of war, if you will, with custody was with our youngest 3. The courts, when they got involved, saw it right away. So when you get professionals involved, you got lawyers, guardian ad litem, psychologists, they've kind of seen it all. And boy, I don't know how they do their job. God bless them. But when they saw our situation, it took all of like 5 minutes to realize what was going on. So the 3 youngest kids were sent back to me. The youngest is now a teenager. So the oldest 3 are out of the house. So the 2 older boys, they're on their own. They're young men and they're still trying to figure things out. And I will just say that I just found out recently that one of them is reading my book, and he said it's really got him thinking, which I know. When you told me that, I had to pick my jaw off the floor. I could not believe it, because that's exactly why I wrote the book, was that they would see and they would hear my side of the story, because they never did. This person even told me, he said, Dad, I realized I never asked you for your opinion. So that's a huge answer to prayer, and that was wonderful, because with other children, I'll just say this, it's been very difficult. One of the children that was under my care is now back with her mom, and I haven't seen her a year and a half. I literally don't know their physical location. It's all kept secret and hidden because of the paranoia of the cult. So that was awful. And so then the 2 youngest still live with me, and we have challenges that we have to face, being in a single parent home, 1, but also 2 of all the baggage that those children will have to work through. Thankfully for them, though, it's as simple as they did not have as much time in that environment as the older children did. So they had less time to be, let's say, scarred or brainwashed or manipulated. So there was less for them to have to process and work through. And I remember one of my family members saying, boy, your kids are going to need counseling for years. I thought, oh, come on, what are you talking about? And that was before I really knew, had my eyes and ears open to the truth of what had happened. And now I think, I say, well, my children are going to be, this will stay with them, this experience. This will hopefully make them stronger people, more resilient. But it is something that's going to stay with them that they will have to process and work through. And they're doing it now.
The email you sent me about your son reading your book, I was like, whoa, I can't picture the kind of dad. This part in the book. Can you just tell me, when it comes to parental alienation as well, which we understand is a tactic that is used by, one or both parents to really use the children involved in the family as a tactic of control or a kind of pawn in this game of who's going to one up the other. But as I said before, your portrayal of Paige in your book is so fair, I think, and the way that she has spoken about you to your children, when it comes to, which parent was trying to alienate us from the other, I think it's fair to say, I only know one side of the story, which is your side. But I think from what I understand, it's fair to say that as the kids get older and make their own decisions on which parent they think did the right thing or right things and behaved the right way, I think it's clear from this end where they'll kind of position themselves with that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if that's why you decided to write the book that way, or maybe you just are fair-minded. I often speak to people who say, in my memoir, I wanted to say, I hate you and you're the worst and you did all these awful things to me and I'll never be the same again.
Yeah, that did enter my mind once or twice for sure. But, you know, the words that she used for me in front of the children, you know, I was the devil, a sperm donor, a liar, a fraud, an alien, a coward, a hypocrite, Satan, sorcerer, on and on and on. And this is verbally, this is all in written documents, court documents, emails and letters, et cetera, et cetera. And I quote a lot of these in my book. And it's stunning. Again, this is the language that she would have learned from Robert, to be very blunt and to be very descriptive. And so that's what she did. And so you would think it'd be very obvious to the children. And I think it's becoming obvious to them. They can see that this is what happened. They realize, well, gee, this is the way mom talked about dad, but, you know, dad never spoke to his mother that way. And then I hope then all the kids will read the book. So I know at least two have. There's one child that's about halfway through it. You can read that, listen, I am fair to her, because that was not the goal of the book, was to trash this woman. But to try and give a fair, and this is impossible to give an objective recounting of the story, but to be somewhat objective, because I quoted her, you know, all the things that she said. And parental alienation is horrible, right? Like, no matter what, you will always be the dad, she will always be the mom. So why put the child through that? I mean, it's just horrible that for a child to hear, you know, the one parent denigrate and demean and destroy verbally the other parent. And boy, did my kids hear a lot of that. So I've tried very hard to not do that towards their mother. And I'll be honest, there are times where it's hard. The things that she does, you know, she's still attacking me in the courts. Now her parents are attacking me in the courts. And she has since remarried. And so the visits with the children and now the new husband around, it's very weird, very awkward. And so I really struggle at times. I really have to watch myself, be careful what I say about their mother.
Oh my gosh, I wish we had time to talk about how Robert's probably got his claws into somebody else. That's wild. And I imagine that you must worry, of course, about your child's safety with her mum. If that's the way that she would treat you in front of the parents, you must have that niggle on how she's treating her child now that you're not there to essentially be like a verbal punching bag.
Well, and I think all the children saw that. I don't think I know. They saw that. So in the back of their mind, whether this is a conscious calculation or not, they will know, you know what, I got to be careful around mom because I've seen the way she treated dad and other people. I don't want that treatment. So I don't know what's going on with that daughter. Am I worried, concerned? Absolutely. It was the day after she graduated high school. She was coerced and pressured to move back with mom. I have not seen her since. I have not spoken with her since. They keep her physical address a secret, so I literally don't even know where she is. I mean, I know she's in Idaho. So that's a tragedy. But I always tell people that parenting's a marathon, not a sprint. And that I pray for her every day that, you know, she'll be safe and that one day we'll have a relationship again. Because we should. I'm her dad.
It'll be the next time you send me an email with an update. It'll say, just to let you know, Casey, this is what's happened. And it will be me cheering for you all the way over here in England.
Yeah, and I thank you so much. I appreciate your, you know, not just being able to come onto your podcast twice, but also I can feel not just, you know, the interest in my story, but the support from you. So I appreciate that very much. Because again, a lot of people, like we talked about to start this whole podcast, well, you know, what was your understanding of cults? And most people just have kind of a, you know, a little superficial, well, you know, cults are kind of crazy and what they've seen in the news. Very few people like you have really studied it and know exactly what people like me have gone through. So for someone like me who's gone through it, to be able to talk to you is helpful, and to be able to reach your audience is helpful. And so hopefully there's someone out there listening that will hear our discussion, and in some way, I don't know how, it'll help them.
and so on and so forth. And hopefully we continue until we, make a substantial difference to how people understand cults and coercive control. Because I was certainly one of those people that I had no idea about the subject of cults before I went on this journey either. So, it's interesting that we find ourselves sat here now. But I wouldn't change a thing. This is definitely my career path, and I'm so honored to be able to have these conversations with people such as yourself, and to be able to promote your work as well. Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, My Journey in and Out of a Cult. It's available to purchase online. It's available on Kindle. It's available in your local library if you request a copy, if it's not already there. And I will be sure to include links to where people can purchase the book online in the episode description. And I didn't know if before we round things up today, Peter, you had any final comments or calls to action or things that you wanted to say to anybody listening who might just need to hear some words of encouragement today.
Well, what I always tell people near the close of my public speaking events when I speak in person is that one of the most important things you need to keep an eye on or have in your life is fellowship and friendship in people. Because when we become isolated, that's when we become very vulnerable. So the isolation is dangerous. We were not meant as human beings to live in isolation. So whether it's, Friday night beers or bowling or Bible study or the Rotary Club or whatever it is, keep meeting with people, keep the lines of communication open, keep writing, keep emailing, keep calling, keep showing up, go have tea, go meet for a cup of coffee or a beer, whatever it is. It's so important, especially in a post-COVID world. Don't give up, make the effort to stay in close communication. Because again, when you become isolated and cut off, you are very vulnerable for that one voice to take over your life. That is a huge danger. So got to stay close to your friends and family. And then conversely, if you see someone that stopped calling, stop emailing, stop showing up to Bible study, to church, to, Friday night cards or whatever it is, reach out to that person. You don't know what they're going through. But you don't want that person to live in an isolated state. It's not healthy.
That's great. That's great, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming here a second time. I look forward to our third chat when you've published your second book on the same subject matter.
Well, actually, my third book is coming out. So my first book was a novel about faith and basketball, and I'm publishing the sequel to that book later this year. And it still has an athletic, tie-in, but the main character, his wife, this will all sound very familiar, kind of starts to become wrapped up in the world of this Uncle Lewis. And so the story is kind of like almost a combination of my first two books. That's called Wardrobe of the Wolf. It comes out later this year.
Wardrobe of the Wolf. Well, please do let us know when you have an update on the release date, and I will share that with the listeners. And I believe the first book was called The Blue Team.
Correct. Yep.
I'll put links to all of these things in the episode description. And I know you've got children to wake up so they're not late for school. And I've got children to go and pick up from school. And that's how funny time zones work. So we'll say goodbye and take care. And we'll catch up soon, Peter.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.